Trump desperately wants his Ukraine peace win.
We're having good talks. We started with Russia. We're having some talks with Russia. Ukraine is doing well. I think they're pretty happy about it. They'd like to see it end.
Good afternoon, everybody.
However, last week, US officials once again jumped the gun, claiming Ukraine had accepted a deal. But both Ukraine and Russia have stayed tight-lipped.
Сьогодні ввечері, за американським часом, українська делегація вже має бути в Сполучених Штатах Америки і буде продовжений діалог на основі пунктів з Женеви. Дипломатія залишається активною. Американська сторона проявляє конструктив і цілком реально найближчими днями доопрацювати кроки, щоб визначити, як достойно закінчити війну. Українська делегація має необхідні директиви.
While Zelensky has confirmed talks continue, there is no deal yet. And despite the leak storm last month in US media alleging alleged call leaks showing Witkoff coaching Kremlin aides, saying that Trump is giving them quote-unquote space and discretion, Trump's troubleshooter Witkoff is headed to Moscow this week.
Steve Witkoff is going over, maybe with Jared. I'm not sure about Jared going, but he's involved in the process. Smart guy, and they're going to be meeting with President Putin, I believe, next week in Moscow.
While there is fury in Washington, D.C., Putin is defending Witkoff, making the matter entirely worse.
The leak of the conversation between Witkoff and the Russians, and then the leak of the later conversation between two Russians talking about what should be the Russian strategy with President of the United States, Donald Trump, shows that there is a division within the administration in terms of how Russia should be dealt with and whether or not Ukraine's sovereignty is worth saving.
It is not surprising for Ukrainians to hear in those tapes released by Bloomberg agency that Witkoff was actually coaching Russians how to speak to Trump. It was already very clear that Trump and Witkoff, they are taking more pro-Russian position. It's very obvious. When in tapes we see that actually he is helping Russians to learn how to influence Trump. Of course, we don't think this is right. He is the diplomat. He is the one who's representing American president. He should be advising American president. But it's up to American people and American leadership to decide whether it's acceptable thing for them.
И вдруг Соединенные Штаты объявляют о введении санкций против двух наших нефтяных компаний. Это в связи с чем? Я вам честно говорю, я даже не понял, а что происходит-то? Вот. Поэтому обвинять господина Уиткофа в том, что он уж больно, любезно обходится со своими российскими коллегами, не в чем. Ну, мы с ним говорили, встречались, повторяю, на Аляске, а потом бум, при полном здоровье, нарождающихся новых отношений, санкций, которые разрушают наши отношения, безусловно.
Meanwhile, Russia intensifies its frontline attacks. Vyshegorod has been hit hard. One person has been killed, 11 injured. Kiev is also under drone and missile barrages. 2 have been reported dead over the weekend.
Зараз ще тривають роботи після нічного удару російських ракет і дронів. Масштабний був удар. Енергетика – основна ціль. Тут Росія не змінює свою тактику і досі намагається завдати Україні саме такого болю. перед зимою. Важливо, що ми протидіємо. Важливо, що є збиття. 19 ракет вдалося збити.
And while Zelensky is blasting Russia through words, Putin is locking the front lines to favorable conditions.
Мы до сих пор получаем заходы о прекращении боевых действий там. Войска Украины уйдут из занимаемых ими территорий. Вот тогда и прекратятся боевые действия. Не уйдут, мы добьемся этого вооруженным путем. Вот и все. Порядок. Там уже 1000 фур прошло. Я думаю, что те на Западе, кто понимают, к чему это может привести.
Settled 8 wars, and I thought this would be one of the easier ones because of my relationship with President Putin. But this is probably one of the more difficult ones. There's a lot of hatred.
Not much has changed since the negotiations in Geneva. The core red lines clash is still Ukraine rejecting territorial concessions.
Російська війна триває, і ми всі чуємо, що Росія плює на намагання ключових світових держав закінчити війну реально, тривалим миром. Але чи буде мир, залежить не від погроз Росії, не від того, які там ультиматуми звучать, а від того, які умови забезпечить світ.
Putin too is adamant. He demands international recognition of his gains.
Конечно, мы хотим договориться в конечном итоге с Украиной. Но это сейчас просто практически невозможно. Невозможно юридически. От них, кто может, кто хочет, тот пускай ведет переговоры. Нам нужно, чтобы наши решения были международно признаны основными международными игроками.
Meanwhile, the European Union is torn. On one hand, the Union is warning that Putin won't stop.
I'm often asked why we are so fixated on Russia's war against Ukraine when there are so many wars and conflicts affecting us all ongoing today, especially in the Middle East. But the answer is very simple. Russia's war in Ukraine is an existential threat. If Putin is not stopped, he will not stop.
And while the EU is expressing its skepticism on Putin's intentions, Hungary's Orban called on for peace and deepened energy cooperation with Russia this week when he was in Moscow, signaling that there is no complete consensus amongst European nations too for a peace strategy in Ukraine.
Ukrajna Magyarország szomszédja. Ukrajina – это сосед Венгрии, ezért a háborúnak a hatása Magyarországra erőteljes. Поэтому Венгрия в полной мере ощущает влияние украинского конфликта на себе. Jelentős gazdasági veszteségeket szenvedünk el. В том числе неся ощутимые экономические потери. A katonai műveletek azok blokkolják a gazdasági növekedést egész Európában és így nálunk is. Потому что экономическое взаимодействие блокируется боевыми действиями. Это верно как в отношении Европы, так и в отношении нас. El fogom mondani önnek azt, amit a korábbi találkozóinkon is elmondtam, hogy Magyarország érdekelt a békében. Скажу также то, что говорил вам на нашей предыдущей встрече. Венгрия заинтересована в мире.
The big question now is, did Trump jump the gun on acceptance?
We can't have a peace agreement with only using one side, namely the Russians. And it seems to me showing something which is untrue in regard to Ukraine. Ukraine has not signed on to this. Ukraine's European partners had not signed on to it. And immediately there were further discussions in Geneva, in Switzerland, about it.
Ukraine calls it a spin to pressure Zelensky.
Well, there is a plan, the initial plan that was developed with Dmitriev, that's the plan developed by Russians and by Americans, and this plan includes certain aspects to which Ukraine will never agree, to which Europe will never agree, because those things can eventually lead to even bigger war in Europe, even bigger Russian invasion, lack of security in the future. So those are non-starters, and that's why Even Trump himself now recognized that he will not be pressuring Zelensky too much.
Ukrainians are adamant on guarantees. US is pushing for a deal first and guarantees later.
Well, the deal breaker for Ukraine are security guarantees. The most important thing is that Russia does not use this plan as something to just take a little pause in the war and then go and reinvade Ukraine and use their territory, which it already occupied, just as a platform from which it will be invading further into Ukraine.
It's completely unrealistic to say you do deal first and you do commitments on security later. The whole point is not to appease Russia and be sort of a Neville Chamberlain going to Munich for peace in our time, which did not work, but having long-term peace on the continent, which affects peace everywhere in the world.
Meanwhile, Moscow says it is ready for serious discussions as it sees US positioning towards them.
I think that it only demonstrates that Russia is ready for any type of dialogue with West countries, including the United States. Russia won't finish this war started by the West and by NATO on Ukraine, and a dialogue is going to be a good solution.
Ukraine knows the writing on the wall. A winter stalemate looms, making conditions ideal for a ceasefire.
Ukraine is ready for ceasefire any day. And ever since Trump started negotiating with the Russians about the peace agreement, Ukraine said that what we want is to have immediate ceasefire and then to keep negotiating about all those difficult matters. But the issue is that it is Russia who is not accepting the ceasefire.
Peace or deadlock? Time is running out. The front lines are hardening, and while the talks are still lying in fractures, the big question is, will Witkoff's Moscow trip break the impasse or expose the unbridgeable gaps? As winter bites, Trump's peace clock ticks louder.